Welcome to Woodworking with Wes. On this segment we're going to talk about hardwood. In the cabinet shop we use lots of different kinds of hardwood. This is our stock here at our cabinet shop. We have many different kinds and we use them on kitchen jobs and on furniture jobs, but you need to know a little bit about hardwood when you go to buy it. We're going to talk about the specific kinds and the grading and the sizes and what it's used for most commonly in the cabinet shop. Alright, I went over to my cutoff pile and I got some little pieces, and I'm going to go through here and I'm going to show you each piece of wood and talk to you a little bit about it. First off, let's talk about what we've got here. We have hickory, maple, red oak, alder, white oak, cherry, and walnut. These are the woods we use most common in the cabinet shop. Each of them has a specific application. Some we use more than others. But these are the most common that we use all the time when we're building kitchens and furniture. So let's just start at one end and go to the other. Let's start off here with our hickory. Hickory is a real hard and very dense and very heavy wood. Not as common as some of the others, but it makes a real nice kitchen, and especially in a clear finish where it shows off the color real well. Now, I want to talk one thing about color for hickory, and it is common in some of the other woods, is the sapwood and the heartwood. Several of different kinds of wood, cherry and walnut, especially in hickory, have a real sapwood and heartwood contrast. Very white, and then your heartwood is your darker wood. When you're doing your project, you have to decide whether or not you want to allow any of your heartwood to show in your project. Now, hickory, we let a heartwood show in hickory quite a bit. We do, however, do what we call uniform dark or heartwood. When we do rustic, they have a classification of rustic heart, which is just the heartwood, and then rustic having knots and things like that. I'm actually doing a kitchen right now that is rustic heart, clear finish. But just so you know, we have heartwood and sapwood on several of our different kinds of wood. Hickory is very hard to a hardwood. It's kind of rough on your machinery. Got to have good sharp tools. Sands up really nice. Takes a finish beautiful. I love hickory. It's a wonderful wood to work with. Just takes a little more work. Our next is maple. Now this piece is a piece of soft maple, and there's soft maple and hard maple. It's not a difference in how hard the wood is. More than that, it's a difference in a tree. There's a softwood tree and a hardwood tree. Maple, soft maple, hard maple. Typically when you get a piece of furniture that is maple, it's hard maple. Soft maple we use a lot in construction type things, paint grades and support pieces and things like that. This just happens to be a piece of soft maple that I had in my cutoff pile, and I wanted to show you. But it's all very white like this. Maple is my least favorite wood. We use it a lot, like I say, for paint grade, and it works real well for that because it's very dense and takes a paint finish beautifully. Easy to work, makes nice furniture pieces and doors and things like that for paint grade. It's a nice wood. I just am not a big fan of maple. It's just one of those things. Years and years of having to deal with it. Our next wood is red oak. We used to use red oak a lot in kitchens. In fact, back in the 80s, you have to remember I'm old. Back in the 80s when I was building lots of kitchens, we used red oak a lot. And we built almost everything out of red oak. In fact, now, 20, 30 years later, I'm doing remodeling and taking out the yellowed red oak that we did and replacing it with paint grades and some of the other woods that we use. But red oak is a nice wood. It's very uniform in color. Very little sapwood. It's a nice tree to mill. Beautiful grains. takes stain beautifully, works nice, sands up good. It's really a nice wood to work with, but kind of out of popularity right now, out of vogue. So our next wood that we use is alder. Alder is one of the softest hardwoods, and remember again, hardwood is a classification of leaf. Typically when you talk about hardwoods, you're talking about trees that have leaves, deciduous and non-deciduous trees. Deciduous meaning it has leaves and the leaves fall off in the wintertime. So when you're talking hardwood and softwoods are your needle woods, pines, things like that. So anyway, but this is one of the softest of the hardwood trees, and it's alder. And we use a lot of alder in cabinet construction. In fact, this piece has a knot because actually we do a lot of knotty alder. Rustic alder is a classification that, depending upon who you're talking to. But alder is a nice smooth wood, has a nice even color, and it takes stain very well. You can stain it almost any color you want to, and takes a nice finish. So it's a nice wood to work with. Our next wood is white oak. Now, here's our red oak tree, and here's our white oak tree, and you can see that the white oak is actually brown in comparison to the red in the red oak. But that's just, again, a classification of the tree, but it's still an oak tree. Same family, just a different tree. We use a lot of white oak in furniture. In fact, if you go back and you look at the Victorian age furniture, the golden oak period of furniture, which was late 1800s, early 1900s, most everything that they did was white oak. If you are familiar with furniture that is quarter sawn oak, quarter sawn is always white oak. The flecks that show up, tiger striping or flecks that show up in the white in the quarter sawn oak furniture is only indicative of the white oak. And we use it now a lot in the cabinet business. It's become very popular, and again, nice beautiful wood, sands great, machines great, takes great stains. I like it a little more natural than some of the darker stains, but on the quarter sawn, the darker stains show up that tiger striping better. So it just depends. This is a piece what we call flat cut, and in another video I'll explain how wood is milled and how you get quarter sawn and how you get flat cut and things like that. But today, just so you know, this is flat cut white oak. This is my favorite wood right here. This is cherry, American cherry, and not the cherry like you pick cherries off for a cherry pie. This is cherry that we use for lumber, and it's a beautiful, beautiful, even-grained wood. But remember we talked about the sapwood? Cherry is a wood that has, this piece doesn't have any, but cherry wood has a real white sapwood. And so when we're building stuff out of cherry, you want to stay with heartwood only. The nice red wood that makes cherry. Again, we use this a lot in cabinet and especially a lot in furniture. Entertainment centers, bookcases, desks, things like that look beautiful when they're out of cherry. You can put a nice natural finish on it, or just a natural clear finish on it, or it takes stain very well. I actually like mine stained a little to the brown side, stay away from the red, because typical old cherry, people think of cherry when they think of the real red furniture. That was kind of an old-fashioned way of finishing cherry. It always had a real red stain. Cherry's not red. You can see it has a red tinge to it, but it's not a red wood. So you can put a lot of different kinds of stain on there, and like I say, I like to stain mine a little to the brown side. It makes a beautiful finish. Really, really pretty in furniture. This is a piece of black walnut, and this is probably the most expensive domestic hardwood. Now domestics, we're not going to get into the exotics today, and there's a lot of exotics. I'm just talking about American grown domestic hardwoods that we use in the cabinet shop. So this is probably the most expensive of the domestic hardwoods that you can get. Beautiful black walnut, American black walnut, just a gorgeous wood. Again, sands nice, stains nice, but it's also got a beautiful natural finish. When you just put a natural finish on it, it just is wonderful. But Again, when we talked about hardwood, this has got just a little fleck of hardwood. Walnut has a lot of sapwood. I mean, not hardwood. This is hardwood, sapwood. Walnut has a real thick layer of sapwood around the tree, and so when it's milled, you'll often see white stripes. Those white stripes you always have to cut off and mill away, and so you want just the beautiful dark heartwood to make your furniture out of. It just is such a nice wood to work with. You get some real nice figure when you get next to knots and crotches and things like that in walnut. It really has beautiful stuff. A lot of the furniture that we do nowadays, we'll use what we call rustic or knotty walnut. Rustic is it's just a way of describing the fact that it's got a few knots in it. It really brings out that character in the grain, makes it look really cool, and when you stain it, that just really pops. I love it that way. Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about when we talk about wood, when you go to the lumber yard, they're going to ask you, okay, what kind of wood you want. We talked about what kind of wood you want and what you're going to use it for, but there's other classifications that you need to be aware of while you're at the lumber yard. One of them is thickness. This is 3/4 of an inch thick, and when you go in to buy your lumber, it's always not milled right down to 3/4. It's what they call 4/4, 1 inch stock. Well, that's what it's cut at the lumber yard or at the sawmill. It's cut 1 inch, then it's kiln dried, it shrinks a little bit, and then they'll mill it a little bit before they send it off to the lumber yard. So 15/16, sometimes even 7/8, and then you take it back to the cabinet shop and mill it down even more, like to 3/4, before you have a finished stock to work with. But 4/4. Now, thicker dimensions, and I brought a piece of thicker stock. This is actually a piece of old walnut, much thicker, you see. Well, they don't call it 1.5 or 1 3/4. It's all done in quarters. So you have 4/4, 5/4, 6/4, and 8/4 stock. Now, remember that as they dry it, it shrinks a little bit. So say I wanted to build something and I wanted it to be a full 1.5 thick. Well, I can't go in and buy 6/4, which is 1.5. I can't buy a piece of 6/4 and end up with a milled 1.5 piece. I have to actually go and buy a piece of 8/4, 2 inches, and mill it down to a net of 1.5 in order to end up with 1.5. So always when you go by, be aware of how much material you want to end up with, and then buy enough wood, the thickness of the wood, so that after the milling that you are required to make, you end up with the net that you need. If you're okay with net 3/4, 4/4 stock. If you need a full net 1 inch, you have to buy 5/4. If you want 1.5 net, you have to buy 8/4. Just something to keep in mind when you go to the lumber yard. Now, grading is another thing. We've talked about thickness, we've talked about the woods and the different kinds, but when you go to the lumber yard, they're going to ask you what quality of wood you want. Most of what you see here is clear. You'll need to, when you go to your lumber yard, talk to them and find out how they classify it. Different retailers or wholesalers, I buy mine from a wholesale lumber yard, will have different classifications, and you need to talk to them and find out what their classification jargon is. If I go into my lumber yard and I want clear cherry, FAS, first and seconds, and it's usually milled S2S, surfaced 2 sides, rough on the edge. You can have it S2S 1E, surfaced 2 sides and 1 edge. These are just things you need to know, but again, clear. If you don't mind a knot, or if you don't mind some of the white sapwood on the sides, 1 common is the next classification lower than FAS or clear. And 1 common has some knots, has some white striping on it. The sapwood, not as good a piece of wood, but if you're looking for a little character in your wood or looking for some distress, maybe that's what you want to go. Alder, when we use alder, we use knotty alder quite a bit, and so the classification for knotty alder isn't 1 common, it's knotty alder, and the particular lumber yard that I buy mine from has a classification for a little bit of knotty and a lot of knotty. They have a premium knotty and a standard knotty alder, or rustic alder, depending upon how you want to classify it. One has more knots than the other. Some of the knots are tight, have not too much black, maybe like that. The standard rustic alder will have bigger knots, some of them even open with holes through it. You have to be careful when you buy wood. You have to just know what you're buying. Ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Oak will come rustic and clear. White oak will come rustic and clear. Maple is almost always just clear. Again, hickory is rustic and clear. Walnut, rustic and clear. Or just be sure that when you go in, you ask questions, you know what you're trying to buy, you know what you're trying to build with it, and then you can get the proper wood. I hope this helped you. I hope I haven't confused you. We'll see you next time on Woodworking with Wes.